These thugs are mobile, they move from community to community, and we must have a policing response that can do the same.
Football, the beautiful game. That is, until it turns ugly. It's a game of passion, pride, skill, but away from the pitch is another story. From the terraces to the trouble, played out on the back streets of cities and towns across the country, hooligans are hunting chaos. As a new season kicks off, we take you inside the inner workings of violent football firms. How do they operate in the modern world of banning orders, CCTV and undercover surveillance? And how do police take them down? Welcome to the Crime Agents. Hello and welcome back to the Crime Agents with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Basu.
Now, thanks so much for listening, and make sure you're following our feed on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And remember, you can watch our full episodes on YouTube as well.
And if you're not following us on socials already, we're at the Crime Agents on all major platforms.
Well, Neil, the football season, it's back. So I think it's important to look back at the birth of football hooliganism, and it kind of really started in the late 60s where we saw violence in and around stadiums and particularly near train stations. And like some fans, well, home fans would wait near the stations and wait for the away fans to arrive. And then there was an obvious clash. And then came the 70s, and it was then you saw the emergence of organised football firms. And in fact, one of the first ones was your lot, Leeds Service Crew, and they were named that way because they were so violent, in fact, that British Rail had to put on their own special chartered trains for them so that they wouldn't,
In my defence, I was a baby when that started.
All right, okay. I wasn't accusing you of being a hooligan just yet. We're only a couple of minutes into the podcast. But do you have any memories?
Football is such a tribal game, and if you don't support the team that's local to where you were born and raised, I was born in Stafford, so yeah. Stafford Rangers were what now we call sort of the Vauxhall Conference League as they were then. My first division side was Wolverhampton Wanderers. Yeah. So we'd go to Molineux. My dad took me to my first, game, and it was actually against Leeds United in 1973. I'm a 5-year-old. I'm on the terraces, and I can't sort of stand properly. I keep kicking the guy in front of me, and he got so upset at one point he turned down and just gave a sort of violent volley of racist abuse to me and my dad. And of course my dad was a very small, very quiet kind of he was a doctor, so he just sort of held my hand, and I have very visceral memories of it because I just thought, I don't want to be here. But I was such a football fanatic. I wanted to watch the game, and I watched Leeds outplay Wolves at Molineux, and I remember coming back and going, sort of looking at my dad and going, why aren't we supporting Leeds United? And my dad was going, what are you talking about? We're in, because we were in the wrong end. Yeah. So, but I just, so hearing the abuse and hearing how violent it was, I could tune that out as a 5-year-old because I was interested in the football. It was only when you look back with memories and you think remember my dad driving to the ground and being racially abused by crowds of people.
Racism's a massive problem in
and it made the whole thing feel, it sort of took the edge off the game, but for me, that first sort of taste of watching a proper, what was then a first division but would now have been a Premier League game was quite something special. Yeah. Peter Lorimer, 40 yards out, scoring a goal for Leeds United.
Everyone remembers the first goal they saw.
It was absolutely amazing.
So let's have a look at some of the well-known firms. You had West Ham's Inner City firm. Then you had the Millwall Bushwhackers, who were very famous and extremely feared. Then the Chelsea Headhunters and the Birmingham Zulus. And the Zulus are interesting because they used to charge at their opposition, shouting Zulu and kind of, doing the spear.
It's got the Michael Caine film.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where it came from. Yeah. And I actually spoke to an undercover officer who infiltrated one of the London firms, and he came up against the Birmingham Zulus, and he told me that the day when they faced Birmingham and that firm ran at them shouting Zulu was the most scary moment of his life. And, you can imagine.
It's interesting because the public order, the Territorial Support Group, or the SPG back in the day, Special Patrol Group, got into terrible trouble because after the success of that film, which is a great film, but of course is not politically correct for the times, but the public order used to sort of slam their batons against their shields marching towards violent crowds,
right,
doing the same thing,
Oh.
you know, and it was they got into quite a bit of trouble for that.
yeah. And then, of course, the biggest firm of all. What's their names? Oh yeah, the police.
That's a little bit unfair. I'd compare it to the policing of football crowds anywhere in Europe and
the
say,
thing is, yeah,
back in the 70s and 80s, where we're talking about, absolutely the police treated football fans like they were all thugs and all criminals, and that was part of the problem, without a doubt.
yeah, and it was in the 80s where you saw the violence really spiral out of control. There was huge moments, and this kind of led to the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher calling it out, and she was saying that football should be banned, and she even set up her own war cabinet. And it was then that the authorities knew that they had to get this under control.
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that government interference.
She was saying she was going to cancel football. But, I mean, that would have just led to even more hooliganism, surely.
Well, given it's the national game, and
Yeah.
literally every village, town and city in this country has got at least one football team which they support. I mean, you could go all the way back to, you know, the formation of the league in '88 and sort of see sporadic outbursts of violence amongst young men on the terraces, but it wasn't an organised hooligan thing. It was this is a game for working class young boys who grow up into adolescence. Who, you know, I know as a police officer, anyone between the ages of about 16 and 24, that's where all the testosterone's going. And they like to have a bit of a ruck.
Well, this
you
was
know.
it, and it was actually the Nottingham Forest manager, the legendary Brian Clough, who actually came out on the Michael Parkinson show and said, if you do that, the country's there'll be an uprising. There would have been. I mean, yeah, not her best idea. Good luck with that one, Prime Minister.
And apart
banning football.
from Cloughie's 44 days at Leeds, he was an absolute legend.
Yeah, he
and
was. Yeah.
I loved him greatly, so we should listen to the words of that wise man.
Exactly. So all this violence in the 80s really kind of culminated right at the end, and the police started infiltrating these groups, sending in undercover officers. There was an operation in London called Operation Own Goal. Now, I'm afraid if you name an operation called Own Goal, it's only going to go one way, and that is a failure. And it was a failure. So they nicked
I think
loads.
the press officer on that one needs to be fired.
Yeah, it wasn't the greatest bit of communication, was it? Loads of hooligans got arrested, but because of the way the evidence was collected, this fell through. And it was Operation Red Card just after that, where officers from the West Midlands kind of learnt from all the mistakes that they infiltrated the Birmingham Zulus. And then they were a very successful operation. But also what made a massive impact was in 1989, football banning orders were introduced. Now, this meant that police, if anyone was convicted of a criminal offence which was linked to football, they could be banned from attending any football matches in England and Wales and abroad, and they even had to, you know, surrender their passports for overseas fixtures for European games and international games. And these bans could last for 3 to 10 years. They had a massive impact.
Well, they did. I mean, if you look back at the history where all of this came from, and you've mentioned sort of Thatcher being up in arms about the state of the game and what it was doing to our sort of national image, if you like. But 1985, so 4 years before banning orders came in, you had Liverpool playing Juventus overseas and 39 people dying in what was
Awful.
started by, you know, basically hooliganism from British
yeah.
fans. Britain gets banned from European football for 5 years.
Yeah,
You know, and
Liverpool were banned for 6.
Yeah, and Liverpool for even longer. So, I mean, that's certainly, you could understand why a Prime Minister who's thinking that's the UK reputation abroad destroyed.
Well, it was. It
would have
had
gone
a
to
massive
that.
effect.
And then you had Public Order Act 1986, the year after. So all the offences of riot, affray, incitement, threatening, abusive, insulting behaviour, all of that codified effectively riotous behaviour, and a lot of that was directed towards football hooliganism. And 89 is interesting when banning orders came in, because people think, I think even today people still think the Hillsborough disaster was caused by fan violence, because that was the misinformation put out by the police at the time. It's one of the darkest days in policing history. But of course it was nothing to do with that. It was the state of stadiums, the state of crowd control, and the poor policing of the event. And that caused that disaster. But it's interesting that that's juxtaposed with the issue of banning orders that year. And I think it was called the Football Spectators Act.
Yeah.
And effectively, what probably clamped down on hooliganism more than anything else at that time was this much more assertive, aggressive policing and the criminal justice system and the increased sentences that hooligans were getting.
Yeah, and just the state being able to specifically target football fans did have an effect. But all this did really was take a large amount of the violence away from city centres. There was also a big rise in CCTV then, as well as undercover surveillance. So the football fans, they clocked onto this, and then they started organising meets, as they called them, well away from stadiums, well away from city centres. So the violence was still happening, it was just contained.
Displaced, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we kind of saw this also happen in the noughties. But in the noughties, the popularity of football firms and their notoriety really kind of depleted and decreased. And that coincided with the rise of organisations like the EDL. Now, there's always been a link between the far right and football hooligans. In the 80s, there was loads of links between the National Front and especially the London firms. The Birmingham and Leeds firms were different because they were quite a lot mixed race. But yeah, the London firms always had that link with far right groups, and the rise of the EDL basically took away a large amount of support from these football hooligan groups because it was a home for them. The football hooligan groups, full of mainly white working class people, they wanted to belong to something, and they saw these football hooligan firms as being something to be part of. But the EDL presented that on a bigger scale, and what you saw was lots of ex-football hooligans, if you can call them that, going to join the EDL and supporting the EDL, and that's kind of why you saw some violence at these far-right rallies.
Well, you've pretty much just described Stephen Yaxley Lennon, his nom de guerre, Tommy Robinson, named after a famous sort of hooligan, if you like. That's precisely the guy who ends up being the poster boy for the EDL is somebody who comes from that background. So, yeah, the link is absolutely...
Yeah, and he had links to the Luton firm Men in Gear. And he, although he was never convicted of being a football hooligan himself, he is openly admitted to taking part in violence in and around football grounds.
And as we've said before, it was a sort of this white working class phenomenon particularly tasty in the 70s and 80s because you had deindustrialization, you had people, mass unemployment. I'm old enough to remember 3-day week, the power strikes, all of that kind of stuff. And football was a release. Once a week you could get together with your mates and there was a release to it. And I had friends who were still going to Molineux as teenagers. They've grown up into successful lawyers and business people, but when they got in the ground, it's amazing what crowd dynamics does, or on the way to the ground.
Mob mentality.
I know, and you've seen a lot of that. I was thinking of the similarities between what happened at Glasgow this year when Bob Villan are sort of inciting a crowd to chant these kind of anti-Semitic death threats. The people in that crowd would have probably mostly been kind of middle-class kids, who don't have violent criminal histories and a criminal record. But this was happening in football hooliganism as well.
That's interesting, because that kind of leads me to my next point, which is where are we now? And if you look at what happened at Wembley in the Euro 2020 final, and that just descended into utter chaos where fans were just storming over the gates. The security were completely caught on the back foot. They couldn't help that. And that really, for me, sums up the modern face of hooliganism, even though it might not be organised by hooligan firms specifically. It's this mob mentality that you see where it just takes a small group to start this disorder, and if someone's full of drink and drugs, then they're going to follow it.
It was a very unusual game, though, wasn't it? I mean, it was because of COVID,
exactly,
and right in the middle of COVID. It was right on the release. It was the day before, I think, restrictions were due to be released, and the way they were trying to manage that game. So it's a very odd moment in our history, but what was unbelievable about it is, despite the hundreds of arrests that were made, very few of them had a criminal record. So it does point to exactly what we were saying. And the other very unusual thing was the fact that, the kickoff wasn't until 8 p.m., but people were absolutely out of their faces by 10 a.m. and gathering. I don't think the police, who were forming up as they normally would do at 3 p.m., thinking 5 hours before a game is plenty of time, did not prove to be the case.
No.
And of course, the one thing that I think surprised all of us, even as professional cops at the time, was the sheer amount of cocaine use, which had become sort of very, very commonplace and
Well, it was
openly
open.
being snorted.
It was openly being done. There's
Yeah.
loads of videos online now. You can see people openly sniffing cocaine. I mean, cocaine back in the 80s and 70s for these firms, it was massively used. I remember, and I'll get into this in more detail later, but I went into a pub where loads of football hooligans were, and then they just took over the toilets and just openly. I mean, the bouncers didn't stand a chance. They're all bigger than the bouncers. They didn't even dare go in there and try and kick them out. Cocaine was a big driver of the violence, as well as alcohol, of course. And the thing is, people may think these football hooligan firms have gone. They haven't. They still operate, but they operate in a much smarter way and on a lower scale. And then they don't have the notoriety that they once had. And they're not in the newspapers as much, and they're not as much of a story. But how they operate now is they will use messaging, encrypted apps such as Telegram to organise these meets, and these meets will again be well away from any CCTV. So it's still going on. And in fact, last season, football disorder, half of regulated football matches in this country resulted in some form of disorder, which is an 18% rise than the previous season. So in fact, football disorder is in fact on the rise.
That's pretty horrific to hear. I mean, given that we're only a few days from the launch of the new season.
Guess what?
What's your prediction for this season?
Well, guess what the out of all the crimes, guess which one was the highest by far in terms of what happened at football games? Yeah.
I would probably think racist abuse.
Correct. Yeah.
I would say that because I'm super woke.
Yeah. So 420 matches last year.
But the really depressing, because we've just been talking about that Wembley final, and of course, our three black stars of English football who missed their penalties in that match were violently abused online straight after that match. Now that's 2021. And then I read one of the Lionesses this year in 2025 got racially abused online herself.
Yeah.
And withdrew from it. So there is still this...
It doesn't surprise
me. Yeah, there is still this major problem. And I remember it was...
You do still hear it.
Yeah, and I think it was June 21 where Gareth Southgate, a deeply principled man, wrote that Dear England letter.
Yeah.
To try and say, there are different ways of supporting England and being English and being patriotic, and it doesn't involve this. And a famous play was written about it.
Yeah.
And that was actually before what happened at that final. And it was about his players being booed for taking the knee post George Floyd.
Yeah.
Which is a big thing for me.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. The kick racism out of football, which is still an ongoing campaign, and clubs are involved in that. And some clubs are doing some brilliant work in terms of trying to educate young people in the community about not behaving that way. But it is still a massive problem.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be going away. But listen, let's take a break there, Neil. And in part 2, I'm going to be telling you about what happened when I tried to infiltrate a football hooligan crew. So let me take you back to my younger days in journalism, when I made probably the foolish decision to infiltrate a football hooligan crew. Now, given I'm from Newcastle, there's pretty much only one crew I could have infiltrated, and those were called the Newcastle Gremlins. Another great name, might I add. And these guys, they were notorious in the 80s. They were massively feared.
Please tell me they named themselves after the movie.
I don't even know, I should know that. It's shameful I don't know that. But anyway, there used to be this pub in Gateshead that they used to go to that I was aware of. So I went there, and this was years and years ago. I mean, I was just about 3 years into the job. And I found out they were going to this pub. I went there with a female colleague, and the idea was for me to just look like I was on a date and clock them and and try and identify them. So anyway, I was in there and we were having a drink, and I was trying to scope them out, and then I saw one that I recognised as basically the head. But as I looked at him, he looked at me, and I thought, oh God, this isn't good. So what I did was I carried on drinking, as you do, obviously.
Stick to your strengths.
I know.
Stick to your strengths.
If in doubt, carry on drinking. Not a message for the kids, that one. But so I went into the toilet, and then I heard the door open behind me, and I thought, God, here we go. And it was the main guy. I turned round and it was him. And he just looked at me. He said, "Who are you?" Used slightly more colourful language.
And he'd come in specifically to challenge you.
Well, yeah, he did. So I said, he said, "You're a cop, aren't you?" And I said, I'm not a cop. And hopefully I was believable because I was telling the truth. But he didn't ask me if I was a journalist. But anyway, he clocked me and then he said, "Well, you're going to have to prove it then." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, come outside now and prove it." And I was like, "Oh, yeah. So I got out there, grabbed my colleague and just said, "We need to go." And then there was 2 entrances. So I went out the other entrance and just scarpered. I was like, I'm having none of that. So that was that. And I thought, I'm not even going to attempt to infiltrate these guys. They were much more clued on. I mean, I talk in another episode we've done about infiltrating the far right. That was actually far more straightforward than trying to infiltrate.
Because these guys were more clued up.
Way more surveillance aware. And they were just constantly eyeing up. Because
the fact that he would ask you that question straight away, I presume they'd been infiltrated by cops before, had they?
Well, there must have been.
Because we were running, as you said previously, we were running undercover.
Well, there was loads of operations. Yeah. Even if they hadn't been infiltrated by cops, they were aware that cops were trying to. And I always used to get told that I used to look like an undercover cop, which, for someone trying to infiltrate people.
The reason I'm interested is that's a very organised criminal mind, as opposed to normal young thugs.
Exactly.
Who'd be worried about a police horse or a riot cop standing on a street corner as they approach a ground.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't be thinking about being infiltrated in their local pub.
No, exactly.
That's a very organised mind.
It just tells you everything about them, that they are an organised criminal group. They're not just a bunch of drunken idiots who are racist. So what happened was I just dropped that investigation. I thought, I'm not doing that anymore. And it was I started looking into another group. And there was this emerging group called the New Batch. Now, the New Batch were a younger group of football hooligans. They wanted to be part of the Gremlins, but the Gremlins wouldn't let them in because they hadn't proved their chops yet. They wanted to see them committing serious violence against a serious firm to be accepted in to one of these groups. So anyway, I focused on the New Batch and I kind of identified a few on Facebook. And what I did was I organised to meet them before Sunderland played Newcastle, and this was in 2013. Local derby, so obviously there's the threat of violence, and that's when the football hooligan crews really start ramping up their plans. So I met them in the pub in the West End of Newcastle I think it opened that day at 10 a.m. and the match was at 12 or 12:30, I think.
Local derbies are always the high-risk games.
Oh, they are. Of course they are, yeah.
Cops, for our listeners, the police designate high-risk matches, and so it depends what it is, but a cup final or massive crowds or 2 particularly warring, but local derbies are always pretty high up.
Oh, totally. I mean, there was, as you can imagine, so much police there. So what we'd done is we knew what the police were planning in terms of shepherding the Sunderland fans back from the ground to the train station. So this had all been planned out and the police had laid this out and they obviously had plans in place. But the New Batch group, they thought that they spotted an opportunity that if we hid around some corner, we could actually get close to the Sunderland fans and potentially break through the police line. I say we, they. I was there being a journalist, of course. But anyway, we went to the match and Newcastle got battered 3-0. Oh, it was a nightmare.
I'm sorry you're having to relive
I know. I'm just like reliving it. It was horrendous.
Forget the football violence.
You're
just reliving that.
Oh, it was. And so I left a bit early because I wanted to get in place for the New Batch. And I found when I got there, I realised that half of the New Batch, or most of them, didn't even go to the game. Were not interested in going to the game. They're just interested in a ruck. So anyway, I came out the ground, and then it was just utter chaos. And the police were charging, and the fans were charging, and then there was a police horse just spinning round, looked really distressed, and I thought, what's happening here? And then I looked, and I saw a guy in a Newcastle shirt with a Newcastle scarf around his face, squaring up to the horse, and he punched the police horse. I was like, what is going on?
I really want to know that the police horse punched him back.
Well, yeah. Well, it wasn't a police officer punched him back, actually.
Have you seen? I mean, hopefully most listeners will not know this because you won't have had a reason to be confronted by a mounted police officer. But police horses are the biggest of the breed. They're all 16 and 3/4 hands plus. They're utterly terrifying. I remember being a public order trained cop before I got back into the department, going to Gravesend, and part of our riot training was to be charged at by police horses, and also to stand our line with shields while police horses moved through us. So we had to stand there as they went past us. Utterly terrifying, but no more terrifying than the sight of a full mounted police officer in full riot gear with a mounted police baton, which is about 3 feet long.
Okay.
And I presume that's what he
used. Funny you should say that. I'm actually coming to that. So I got with the new batch lads, and then they started just hurling bottles. So what they did is that they went near to a pub, and there was one of these recycling bins. They just emptied the bin, and hundreds of glass bottles just went across the road, and they all just picked these up and just started hurling them. Obviously I didn't. I was just kind of on the edge, just pretending to be a hard lad, which of course I'm not. And then I just found myself in the middle of just utter chaos, and I thought I'm in big trouble here. But I was filming everything. I was filming everything with my iPhone, because iPhones were a thing then, and actually it was much more. Everyone was filming anyway, so actually you're not very conspicuous if you're filming, because everyone is. So I was filming it all this, and then all of a sudden, police horses came out of nowhere, round the corner, and just started charging at us because we were clearly identified as the danger group. They started charging at us. So the new batch blokes, they ran around the corner, and I followed them. I made sure I was at the back, just in case, they came in front of Sunderland fans or whatever. So went round the corner, but we actually ran into a cul-de-sac. So we turned round, and I then find myself at the front, and a massive police horse just started running up to me. Well, several police horses, but one in particular came right up to me, and we were backed in. The police horse came up, and just like they're trained to like kick out if they get really close to you. They got really close. This police horse just smacked me in my knee. So I'm down, struggling. And then by the time I get up, I look up, and then I look up at this police horse, and he just goes doink, headbutts me. I was like, and then
I'm not sure whether they're trained to do that or whether he just used common sense.
Well, what, the police horse?
The police horse, yeah.
Yeah, well, he did. Anyway, next thing, I'm on my arse, and then I've got a police officer holding my arm. And then I think, well, here we go. I'm getting nicked here, even though I've not done anything wrong. But actually, the new batch, they started pushing the police officer off me. And then I saw a little gap, and I thought, I'm out of here. And I just sprinted away as far as I could. And then we actually put that story out about it, an hour later. And we put
You haven't told me the story about evading custody before.
Well, no. Well, yeah, we'll not go into that now, Neil. But I ran back to the office, and we put the story out, and because the footage was so visceral and violent, I just joined Sky then, or they had a Northeast newsroom, so I was waiting for Sky. So Sky, the Northeast team, they sent it down to Sky News. And I remember the news editor down in London in Sky News was saying, where have we got this footage from? We need to know where it's from, because there's, of course, copyright issues. And they said, no, it's our reporter who's filmed this. And he's like, no, I'm not having that. He didn't believe them that a reporter had actually got that close.
Is that footage still up online?
Well,
it was
online? Yeah, I'm sure you can find it. Yeah, I'm sure you can find it. I mean,
I just wonder what that would feel like for you watching that back.
Well,
that you were in
PTSD.
the middle of that. Yeah. Potentially. Yeah.
So anyway,
I want to give the police horse a medal.
Yeah. Well, tell me about it. The news editor. He actually rang me up because he just didn't believe my news editors in Newcastle that I'd filmed this. So he rang me up, and he was a Geordie, a lad called Ian Sherwood, and he was a Newcastle fan. He's like, and I've never met him before, and he just spoke to me for a few minutes. He's like, did you actually film this? Because we don't believe, a reporter could get that close.
Yeah.
And then I said, actually, it was me, but, I didn't intentionally get that close. I just found myself there and just continued filming.
It's interesting that you say that the filming was completely inconspicuous because everyone's
everyone's
got
filming.
a smartphone there. I just take you back to, when you're in the pub and you're looking at these people in the pub, and you were talking about most of these guys don't even want to go to the game. They just want to ruck.
Yeah.
Tell us what you learn about. We're always accused of profiling people, and I'm sure in a later episode we'll get to stop and search and all of that. But in terms of the profile of the people you were seeing involved in this, what did you learn about the type of person that a hooligan was while you were looking so closely at?
Just white working class people. Quite a few just had normal jobs, and they just the interesting thing about when you spoke to them, they talk about fighting like people talk about, like a police officer would a great operation, or they would talk about like winning a football match. If they win a fight, to them it's like winning a football match. They talk about this buzz that they get. So whether there's a screw loose there, I don't know. Perhaps there is.
It's interesting. I'm sort of thinking of that brilliant band Hi-Fi and the Hard Fight and Living for the Weekend.
Yeah.
And this is what
exactly.
They want the paycheck on a Friday.
Yeah.
They're going to get tanked up on a Friday night all the way into Saturday, and then they're going for a fight.
Yeah,
they're not going to watch football. They're going for a fight.
Also, because of football banning orders, football hooligans just can't go to the match. So I'm sure quite a few of these guys had football banning orders, which is why we met in the West End of Newcastle, out of the city centre, because they weren't allowed in. Now, they would have defied their football banning order to come in because, the chance of a fight against Sunderland is just too juicy to resist for them. So, yeah.
Yeah, and those banning orders they're probably the single best way of breaking football hooliganism from the 80s onwards, weren't they? 89, I think you said banning orders came in, and that was right. But, by the mid-90s, those banning orders have been incredibly successful. I think people were being banned for life as well. And there were short periods and being banned for life.
It's like repeat offenders, and if you just keep doing
it. And if you added that to CCTV and people could be seen, then they weren't going to games.
Do you know, interestingly, I mean, people think these football banning orders aren't as prolific. Last year, 685 new orders got imposed, and now we're at a record high. We've never had more football banning orders active as we do right now. There's 2,500.
Well, I mean, that is astonishing in some
Massive
respects,
amount,
isn't it? But I was looking at the sort of arrest statistics. We were trying to get Chief Constable Mark Roberts, who I know well, Chief Constable of Cheshire, who's the National Police Chiefs Council lead for football and runs the UK football policing unit and all of the intelligence stuff around there. And he would have been able to say what the arrests were, but we couldn't get him on. Unfortunately, he wasn't available. I'm sure he'd want to come on and talk about this at another time. But arrests, all the way through the era that you've just described, through the early noughties into the mid-teens, and then as we get to around 2018, 2019, that is the low for numbers of arrests for football-related violence.
Yeah.
And then obviously we had COVID, so if you take that out of the equation, but then there was a steady rise that you've talked about since. There was a little dip last year in arrests, but as you say, I don't know whether that's because they put more banning orders in place, but there does seem to be this kind of, how can I put it? There's just a baseline that they can't get beneath. It's never going to quite stop. So there's still around 2,000 arrests a year. So we can predict that for next year, I'm sure, as well. And that banning order number is something I hadn't seen. I mean, that's quite astonishing.
It's massive, isn't it? Yeah. And listen, we're going to take a break there. And the police is the topic of our next part. And that's because who should pay for policing football matches? Should it be the millionaire football clubs, the rich football club owners, or should it be you, the public? Neil, I think this is an issue that may surprise a lot of people and certainly will anger a lot of people, but policing costs 70 million quid a year. Why are the public paying for this, and why aren't the rich football clubs?
Well, I think the public should be angry about this, and I think we've heard the Commissioner, Mark Rowley, in London has 6 Premier League clubs, so London is paying a huge chunk of money, and London taxpayers a huge chunk of money in order to get their fixtures policed. And Mark Rowley has made it very clear that he doesn't think the taxpayer should be funding that. This is not a core policing service. This is policing that is solely designed to make it safe for Premier League clubs to put on a show for the public, and that is not being reimbursed by either the Premier League or the football teams that are supported by the Premier League.
Tell you what's interesting is that Sir Mark Rowley came out with this last month, I believe, and it was one of the main points he wanted to make in interviews and on the Sunday politics shows, and also in a article in the Times, alongside, saying police shouldn't be worked as social workers. It's interesting, isn't it, that he flags this up? So this is something that he really wants to make a point with, isn't it?
Well, because it's been. I remember first having this discussion when I was a superintendent in the Commissioner's office back in 2008. So this argument about who pays for policing at football matches has been going on for at least, nearly 2 decades. In my own knowledge, it's probably been going on a lot longer than that, and certainly since the Premier League was first brought into being in '92. So we've talked a lot about hooliganism. I mean, the reason that hooliganism has decreased to such an extent from the 70s and 80s, in my view, the principal reason was the Premier League needed to make it a family-friendly environment. They wanted TV rights, and TV companies like your old people, Sky, they were not going to pay hundreds of millions of pounds to screen violence. They wanted to screen good football, good entertainment. So all of that money poured into the Premier League from '92 onwards. Footballers got rich. Transfer market got ridiculous. You got individual clubs spending £500 million on players in the season, and yet they don't want to put their hands in their pockets to pay to police those games to make them safe for a completely new footballing demographic. When my dad took me to football in the 70s, there weren't very many women in the ground. It was a male-orientated sport. It was largely white working-class kids from hometowns. Now it is a family-friendly sport. Women and girls want to go and watch. We have the Lionesses probably proving to the Lions about how they should actually win a few tournaments. It's a different game, and because of that, why would you not want to keep it safe? And then why would you? I mean, Sir Mark is very clear. This was a budget problem. Policing are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and if they're going to do specialist functions like policing football games, they should be reimbursed for it, and it shouldn't fall on the tax-paying public, not all of whom want to watch football.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous.
I'm on his side.
I totally agree with it. I think it's ridiculous when you look at the amount of money these football clubs make. I mean, I think their argument will be that, listen, the amount of tax we're paying, that we are therefore already putting this into the public purse, but it's not as straightforward as that, is it?
Well, I happen to know that there's at least one chairman of one very, very, very rich football club that makes exactly that argument, saying, hang on, I'm a taxpayer, I pay for policing anyway out of my core tax. They should just get on with the job they should be doing. I find that argument unbelievably vacuous. Core policing isn't about breaking up fights in town centres and at railway stations for people who are fueled up on alcohol and waiting to go and have a fight. And as we've just said in part 2, sometimes don't even want to get anywhere near the ground, but the reason they're there and the reason they're drunk and the reason they're in pubs is because of that football game.
Of course it is.
Now, of course, we've made the ground safer for the people who want to go, and therefore the football teams get that money channeled to them from the Premier League, from the worldwide global TV rights. I mean, I think you and I will both know the Premier League is the best league in the world.
It certainly is.
It is the most televised and it's the most watched worldwide. That's where the hundreds of millions of pounds come from.
Yeah.
I think Sir Mark is asking for a very, very small courtesy from the Premier League and from the football teams it supports who get that money that enable them to pay for those players. He's asking for a very small amount of money in order to make it safe for you and I to go and watch a football game in peace with our loved ones and our families.
Let's face it, the reason he's coming out and making this point is because he wants the public to know about this, and I presume he wants the public to engage with it.
And I suspect he's done it because in the past the Home Office didn't really want to get involved in this. They'd say this is an argument, this is a civil argument between policing and the Premier League and football clubs. This is not something for the government to get involved in. He's brought the government into it.
Yeah, he has. It just depends whether they're listening or not. Judging by the very fact that he's come out and mentioned it, he's obviously trying to put pressure on them.
Well, I strongly suspect the Home Secretary is on his side because
They are quite...
The Home Office is not protected. You know, in the last spending review, it's all gone to the Ministry of Defence and the National Health Service. They're going to have to find money in policing just to keep normal policing going. To put neighbourhood cops back into neighbourhoods, which is what they want to do, they need more money. Well, that money is being taken away, along with the cops to police these events, is being taken away from neighbourhoods. Why would the taxpaying public want that to happen just so a few of us could go and watch football in safety? They want the extra cops, the extra money, the extra shifts to be paid for by the people who are causing the problem in the first place, which is effectively football.
Yeah, and the amount of overtime pay that these football matches will cost is, again, just adding to the cost.
And it's not just, if you're a professional cop and you want to do a good job, these are very long, exhausting days.
Yeah.
You know, you can imagine in the height of summer when you're in that kit, and a lot of the specialist officers who might have to be called into those high-risk games we talked about.
And the horses, don't forget the horses.
And the horses, they're all kept out of sight, but they're either in half kit or full kit, sitting there. It's physically and emotionally exhausting to do that.
Especially when it kicks off. I mean, God.
It isn't about the overtime. It's not about the money. You know, cops, like the rest of us, will want to be paid for the hard work that they do. And the overtime is one thing. But if they're exhausted on those shifts, how are they supposed to come back the next day and do the job that the taxpayer is expecting them to do, which is dealing with the crimes in the communities? You know, effectively, there isn't just a group of cops who sit around waiting for a football game. You know, when they're not policing football, they're doing other policing duties.
Of course, yeah.
And Mark wants compensation for that,
and
I think he deserves it.
I think we both agree on this one.
We do, and we're quite. You know, I hope Sir Mark's listening, because I keep forgetting to put his knighted, and then he really did earn that knighted. So I'm sorry, Sir Mark. It is Sir Mark.
Right, let's blow the full-time whistle on this one, eh?
I think
you
so.
like that?
I think so. I like your ending.
Well, that's actually producer Guy's suggestion.
Oh, so, was it? Well, are you giving him credit?
I know. After all he's done for us.
Exactly. Sorry, Guy. But we happen to know who you support as well. So, given we're on that episode.
Exactly. Yeah. Manchester United. Okay, so that's it from us. Thanks for listening to the Crime Agents. Make sure you've subscribed on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And we'll be back with another main episode next Wednesday, and we'll have a bonus episode for you on Monday. So remember, if you've got any questions for us, and thank you very much for all those questions that have been coming in, either about our real life experience as a cop and a journalist, or about anything that's in the news, please send them in and we'll answer them in a bonus episode soon.
And you can send them by email to thecrimeagents@global.com or follow us on social media. We're at The Crime Agents on all major platforms, and you can leave a question there. Well, that's it. Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.